the PPT, then we will start. Is PPT visible to all of you?
Visible. Yes, sir.
Yeah. In today's class, we are going to discuss about classification of meristems. Classification of meristems. Meristems have been classified into different types based on various criteria. Here, we are going to discuss about 4 different criteria which were taken into consideration for the classification of meristems. The first criteria taken into consideration to classify the meristem is based on the development, or you can say origin, from where the meristem is developed or from where it is originated, which is the first criteria which we are going to discuss about. And the second criteria taken into consideration is based on position of meristem. Classification of meristem is based on the position. This is the second criteria which was taken into consideration for the classification of meristem. And the third criteria is the plane of division. The plane of division. And what is the position of the plane of division when compared to the axis? When compared to the axis. So here, which is also a very important criteria, which was considered to classify the meristems. And the last criteria is the function, based on function. Classification of meristem based on function. These are the 4 criteria which were taken into consideration to classify the meristem, based on development or origin, based on the position, based on the plane of division, based on function. Based on function, and meristems is very important topic for your semester 3 cement examination, which is very important essay question. Write an essay on meristems or explain different types of meristems, which is very important topic for your semester and examination. So let us move to the first criteria, that is based on the development of meristem or origin. So here, classification of meristem based on origin. On the basis of origin, meristem has been classified into three types. First one is the promeristem. Second one is the primary meristem. Third one is the secondary meristem. Promeristem, primary meristem, secondary meristem are the 3 types of meristems which were classified on the basis of origin or development. Promeristem, primary meristem, and secondary meristem. So let us see the first one, that is promeristem. Here, primary meristem represents primary stage of meristem, which is also known as primordial meristem. Promeristem is also known as primordial meristem, or it is also called as embryonic meristem. Embryonic meristem, and which represents the primary stage of meristem. As you all know that embryo is developed from a diploid single-celled zygote. Diploid zygote develops into a multicellular embryo by mitotic divisions. Zygote undergo mitotic division, repeated mitotic divisions, and produce a multicellular embryo. Each cell of embryo have the capacity of division. Each cell in the embryo has the capacity of division. Each cell can undergo mitotic division and produce cells. So all the cells in the embryo have the capacity of division, and which is known as promeristem or primordial meristem or embryonic meristem. The meristem which is present in the embryo is promeristem or primordial meristem. An embryonic axis represents this type of meristem. If you observe the embryo or embryonic axis, it has epicotyle, cotyledons, hypocotyle, and radicle. These are the parts of embryonal axis or embryonic axis. Epicotyle, cotyledons, hypocotyle, and radicle. Radicle develops into root, and this cotyledon develops into shoot system. You all know that. Every cell in epicotyle, hypocotyle, and radicle have the capacity of division. They divide and produce cells. Am I clear, Amma?
Yes, sir.
Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Now we are discussing about the promeristem. Promeristem is also known as primordial meristem, or it is also known as embryonic meristem, which is developed from zygote. In other words, we can say promeristem is developed from zygote. Zygote divides mitotically and produce a multicellular embryo. Each cell of embryo has the capacity of division, so that the cells or tissue present in the embryo is considered as meristem, and which is called promeristem or primordial meristem. In embryo, if you observe the parts of embryo, epicotyle is there, hypocotyle is there, in between primary meristem, that is second one. Promeristem gives rise to primary meristem. Is that clear, Amma?
Yes, sir.
Promeristem is also known as primordial meristem or embryonic meristem. Let us move to second one, that is primary meristem. Primary meristem is developed from promeristem. Just I have mentioned about that. Yeah, here you can see primary meristem originates from promeristem. Primary meristem originates from promeristem or primordial meristem or embryonic meristem. This primary meristem always active and gives rise to, it divides and gives rise to primary meristem as well as some permanent tissue. Primary meristem is always active, it divides continuously and gives rise to primary meristem along with permanent cells. And if you see the occurrence of primary meristem is found in shoot apex, root apex, and intercalary parts of the plant. The growing tips of the plant, shoot apex and root apex, consists of primary meristem. Shoot apex and root apex are the growing tips. They continuously grow. The tissue present in the shoot apex and root apex are continuously divide and produce permanent cells. In this way, shoot apex and root apex is involved in the primary growth. Primary growth is nothing but increase in the length. Primary growth leads to increase in lengthwise. Okay, and if you see the meristem which is present in the vascular bundle in between xylem and phloem is considered as intercalary meristem, or sometimes intercalary meristem is present at the base of internodes. Base of internodes. Primary meristem is found in shoot apex, root apex, and intercalary parts, which is important point for competitive examinations. Primary meristem is found in shoot apex, A, root apex, B, root apex, C, intercalary parts of plant, D, all above. What is the answer? Primary meristem is found in A, shoot apex, B, root apex, C, intercalary parts of the plant, D, all above. What is the answer?
All above.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to understand the subject thoroughly. Then only you can answer this type of questions. Sometimes they may ask like this: primary meristem found in A, shoot apex, B, root apex, C, base of internodes, D, all above.
All above.
Yeah. Usually intercalary meristem is present at the base of internodes. At the base of internodes. If you observe monocot stems, you can clearly distinguish node and internodes, right? If you observe the stem of maize, if you observe the stem of jowar, if you observe the stem of rice, so the stems are clearly distinguished into nodes and internodes. Usually intercalary meristem is present at the base of internodes. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, let us move to third type of meristem, that is secondary meristem. Secondary meristem is usually originates from permanent tissue by a process called dedifferentiation. Yeah, here you can see. It originates from permanent tissue. Usually, permanent tissue do not undergo divisions. But if you provide proper conditions, in some conditions, the permanent tissue dedifferentiated into meristematic tissue. This meristematic tissue is known as secondary meristem. The meristem which originates from permanent tissue is known as secondary meristem. Primary meristem is the promeristem is embryonic meristem, which is present in the embryo. Primary meristem originates from promeristem, whereas the secondary meristem originates from permanent tissue which is already there in the plant. Permanent tissue has different functions. If you see the chlorine-chyma, which perform photosynthesis. If you see some other parenchymatous tissue, colorless parenchymatous tissue, store the food materials. And if you see epidermal tissue is used for the protection. So there are different functions. There is division of labor. If you see xylem, if you see phloem performs conduction of food material. Xylem performs conduction of water and minerals. If you see the cells which are present in the pith or medulla, which stores the food material. So different permanent tissue has different functions. But in some cases, in some cases, when proper conditions are provided, the permanent tissue is modified into meristematic tissue. This meristematic tissue is called secondary meristem. Secondary meristem divides mitotically and gives rise to secondary permanent tissue. The permanent tissue which is developed from secondary meristem are called secondary permanent tissue. For example, if you secondary xylem is there, secondary phloem is there, secondary cortex is there. Usually secondary growth takes place in dicot stems. Secondary growth is absent in monocots, but it is present in dicots. Dicot, the main axis of the dicot stem needs secondary growth because there are number of branches are present on the main trunk or axis of the secondary, dicot stem. Usually branches are absent in monocots, right? Do you observe branches in monocots? For example, if you take coconut tree, or you can take palm trees. Do you observe branches in these plants?
No, sir.
There are no branches, only leaves are present at the tip of the main axis. So in those plants, the plant body is known as cortex. The stem is known as cortex. So as branches are absent in the monocots, there is no need to bear more weight by the main stem or trunk. So that is the reason why secondary growth is absent in monocots. Whereas in case of dicots, number of branches, primary branches, secondary branches, and tertiary branches, and so on, are developed on the main trunk or axis. So in order to bear the increased weight of these branches, secondary growth is needed. So that is the reason why secondary growth is occurred in case of dicot stems. Am I clear? Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
What is secondary growth? Primary growth leads to increase in the length. Secondary growth leads to increase the diameter, or girth of the plant stem, right? Here, increase in diameter due to secondary growth. Some of the permanent cells dedifferentiated into meristematic cells, and they form a ring-like structures along with the primary tissue. In case if you take cork cambium is the meristematic ring which is formed at the outside of the cortex. The cells of the cork cambium divides and produce secondary tissue. The cells of cork cambium produce secondary cortex towards inner side and produce cork towards outside. Cork towards outside, secondary cortex towards inner side. And here also, and fascicular cambium, interfascicular cambium, the meristematic strips which are present in between the two vascular bundles is called interfascicular cambium. Interfascicular cambium plus intrafascicular cambium together form a ring-like structure that is called fascicular cambium, or you can say vascular cambium. Vascular cambium divides and produces secondary xylem towards inner side, secondary phloem towards